out exactly what Boris Johnson is going to do at PMQs in just a moment. Keir Starmer facing Boris Johnson across the dispatch box. You can watch along. Tim Shipman is here. We're turning the cameras on. Go online to your YouTubes. Search on YouTube for Times Radio. You can watch Tim Shipman and I as we pause the action live from the House of Commons. Let us know where you're watching. People are watching from Japan. Blimey, O'Reilly's. Go online to YouTube. Search Times Radio. You can watch along. We'll pause the action live from the House of Commons. But if you can't get near YouTube, maybe you're driving. Don't look at YouTube if you're driving. Don't worry, we'll bring you all the action you need to know as Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer face each other across the dispatch box. How many times will they say, wait for Sue Gray? We'll find out very soon. That's next on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. Prime Minister's Questions kicks off in a few minutes with Boris Johnson facing another session of tough questions about Downing Street lockdown gatherings. It's thought the internal report into claims from senior civil servant Sue Gray will be shared with Number 10 imminently, and we'll bring you that live in just a moment. In other news, the UK and US say they could target Vladimir Putin personally with sanctions if he decides to invade Ukraine. Russia has over 100,000 troops on its border. And police in Manchester are questioning two men as part of the investigation into hostages being taken at a synagogue in Texas. 44-year-old Malik Fazal Akram, who's from Blackburn, was shot dead by the FBI after a 10-year standoff earlier this month. And we'll bring you a full news update at 12:30. But now, at just after midday, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Here we are again then. It's the most important PMQs since the one last week and the one before that. Tim Shipman is here, chief political commentator for the Sunday Times. What's going to happen, Tim?
Oh, I don't know, Matt. It's going to be very exciting.
Don't say that.
It's
You're
like
in the lobby. You're a
it's like
political
prize
commentator,
fight, isn't it?
You should know everything.
Well, the first thing is that Boris Johnson has not listened to David Davis, so we will be there this week. He has not gone, and we know that he's sort of limbering up for a difficult session because he's been jogging this morning. We saw him out in the dark with the dog.
Is that a sign of something?
Well, it's like sort of Rocky training, isn't it? For this, you expect. I imagine he goes along in his head, with rousing tunes in his head, preparing to talk about Captain Hindsight or something as he tries to riposte what will doubtless be some pretty tricky questions.
And if you're Keir Starmer, do you just talk about parties and cake and so on, and risk wait for Sue Gray? Just for the whole 6 questions? Or do you talk about Ukraine, cost of living, gas prices, national insurance, and all the other stuff, which actually is upsetting Tory MPs as well, and show that you're slightly rising above it all?
I think he will probably not do all 6 on it because, frankly, we don't know a great deal more than we did last week. We've now had the birthday party, so I would think the birthday party is good for us. Well, you need a serious question about the police, you need some kind of question about the birthday party, and some kind of joke about cake and whether Boris Johnson still believes in having it and eating it, or whether he now believes in, I didn't know anything about it. And
he was ambushed
with a cake. So there's a lot of fun to be had with some of the more ridiculous things that the Johnsonians have been saying over the last 48 hours. And if Rishi Sunak pipes up next to him, I dare say there's a couple of jokes to be about how Sunak had gone for a serious meeting and accidentally found himself in the midst of this cake chaos.
He stumbled across Boris Johnson's cake ambush. We're just waiting for PMQs to start. They're just winding up the previous question session. Online, if you're watching on YouTube, hello to Hugh in Portugal, Tim in Sweden. Where else are you watching in from? Melbourne. Hello, Declan. Theo's in Cambridge. Jack's in Switzerland. Somebody's in the West Midlands. Ginny's in Birmingham. Go on. San is in Japan. So go online. Let us know where you're watching and what you expect to happen, because I think it is a tricky one for Keir Starmer.
But there's so much going on in Ukraine. I think he will probably want to talk about that as well. And, there are some people with suspicions that Britain's response has been particularly robust, perhaps to give Boris Johnson something else to talk about. So it'd be interesting to see if Starmer takes that approach.
Just going into this, from the people you're speaking to, what is the mood amongst Tory MPs?
I think they're slightly becalmed, but they're also getting a bit sick of this and the relentlessness with which yet another story emerges. And Dominic Cummings was very open on his blog earlier this week, in which he said more of this stuff is going to keep coming, and don't think that the Sue Gray report will be the end of it, because there'll be some people who won't have wanted to talk to Sue Gray or provide her with photographs or whatever, because the Prime Minister might find out who's been doing the dirty on him. The police investigation makes that a slightly different creature now, because people are much more likely to cooperate with the police, I would have thought. But yeah, they're sort of waiting for this report, not quite knowing what to expect. There's been so much briefing, a lot of it ill-informed, that it's going to be great or it's going to be disastrous. And people now just want to see what it says in black and white and begin to make their own minds up.
It's interesting looking at the pictures from the House of Commons. You've got Brandon Lewis sitting directly next to the Prime Minister, because I think he's just been doing Northern Ireland questions. And on his other side, there's Liz Truss, who is out sort of defending him this morning. Then Priti Patel, and then Rishi Sunak, which unfortunately for Rishi Sunak means he's just out of shot on the main shot, because he was a bit prominent last week.
Yes, he whether he wants to be seen sitting next to him or not is a slightly moot point. There's quite a lot of Union Jack face coverings on the Conservative benches as well.
Well, I assume because last week Christian Wakeford, having crossed the floor, was wearing one, so maybe they're trying to take back the flag. And Liz Truss and Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, are they manoeuvring behind the scenes?
Well, they're trying not to, but lots of people who like them are trying to sort of position them and start to make the argument about why they're the best person for the job, should the job become available, whilst the principals, Truss has done a slightly better job than Sunak of appearing to be publicly loyal, though I think a lot of people think that's that their actual loyalties are fairly similar, which is that it's slightly conditional now.
Asking online what Keir Starmer should actually do. Robert says sing happy birthday. Diana says offer Johnson some cake and say, how about you eat this while I run the country. Catch COVID again, says Dave. And Stephen says ask Angela Rayner to stand in. She's much more effective. Well, you can watch along right now. We're crawling towards 1,000 people online. Go to your YouTube, search Times Radio, so you can see Tim and I as we watch along the live House of Commons feed. It's Mary says PMQs is almost as addictive as Wordle. Juanita's watching from Frome. Looking forward to Tim's impressions. You've got, because obviously Patrick Maguire has perfected the Lindsay Hoyle impression, so maybe you can do, if you could rustle up a Keir Starmer impression before the half hour's out, that'd be lovely.
Slightly trickier one, isn't it?
Here we go then. This is PMQs Unpacked. You're listening on Times Radio. You're watching on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Let's go to the House of Commons. This is Keir Starmer.
Leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I join with the Prime Minister in his comments in relation to Bloody Sunday? The Ministerial Code says that ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation. Does the Prime Minister believe that applies to him?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course, but let me tell the House that I think he's inviting a question about an investigation which, as you know, Mr. Speaker, I can't comment, and on which he, as a lawyer, Mr. Speaker, will know that I can't comment on. And what I am focused on is delivering the fastest recovery of any European economy from COVID, the fastest booster rollout, 400,000 more people on the payrolls now than there were before the pandemic began. And we're launching a policy tomorrow, Mr. Speaker. He talks about people being out of work. In my case, that's what I understand why he wants it. We're launching a plan tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, to get 500,000 people off welfare into work. It's a fantastic idea. I hope he supports it.
Let's just jump in there then. So we should explain that the idea of misleading Parliament is seen traditionally as a very serious matter.
Yes, I mean, one of Boris Johnson's chaps was out this morning saying, well, he hasn't robbed a bank, but lying to Parliament, misleading Parliament, when you don't correct it, is seen as, frankly, as a more mortal sin than robbing a bank in Parliament.
And it's a it used to be a resigning offence.
It did. Though more recently, what seems to have happened is that people go to the dispatch box to correct their error.
Yeah.
But Boris Johnson has clearly has a degree of confidence that whatever Sue Gray says, she ain't going to be saying that he misled Parliament. And interestingly, I was wondering whether we'd get some obfuscation there and avoidance of the question. Actually, we didn't. We got a straight answer from Boris Johnson, which is that if I'm found to have misled Parliament, I will resign, which can only mean that he thinks he didn't mislead Parliament.
Although he did say, I've been assured there were no parties.
That is very true.
I
Perhaps,
suppose
but that may be true.
He could have been assured while forgetting that he was at some of them.
I think reading between the lines of all the conversations one's had over the last few weeks, it is very clear that in number 10 they decided that they had not broken the rules, and that is what they told the Prime Minister. The fact that was palpable nonsense doesn't seem to have changed that line.
So then Boris Johnson then just sort of preempted a whole load of things that Keir Starmer hadn't done. So I'm not going to comment on the ongoing investigation. Then the faster economic recovery, the booster programme and so on. And then, out of nowhere...
Well, don't get bored of that yet, because you'll be hearing that again.
But then he just announces a policy, which has got nothing to do with the question, to get 500,000 people back into work. And he almost made a joke about his own imminent unemployment, I thought.
Sort of, yes.
We'll see.
I think Boris Johnson likes living on the edge. That's.
I kind of think if I was him, I might have kept my 500,000 people out of work policy up my sleeve for maybe
question 5.
Well, let's see how we get on then. Let's go back. This is question number 2, Keir Starmer.
I think the Prime Minister said yes, he agrees the code does apply to him. Yes. And therefore, if he misled Parliament, he must resign. Yes. On the 1st of December, the Prime Minister told this House, in relation to parties during lockdown, all guidance was followed completely in number 10 from that dispatch box. Yeah. On the 8th of December, looks quizzical, he said it. On the 8th of December, the Prime Minister told this House, I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged there was no party. So since he acknowledges the ministerial code applies to him, will he now resign?
No, Mr. Speaker. But since he asks about COVID restrictions, let me just remind the House, and indeed remind the country, that he has been relentlessly opportunistic throughout. He has flip-flopped from one side to the other. He would have kept us in lockdown in the summer, Mr. Speaker. He would have taken us back into lockdown at Christmas, Mr. Speaker, and it's precisely because we didn't listen to Captain Hindsight that we have the fastest growing economy in the G7, Mr. Speaker, and we have got all the big calls right.
OK, let's jump in there. Keir Starmer repeating. I mean, obviously, it was a big deal 2 weeks ago when Keir Starmer called for him to resign. It's now a sort of par for the course. And then we just got Boris Johnson's greatest hits. We'd still be in lockdown now. I mean, strictly speaking, the Labour Party didn't call for a lockdown at Christmas. They did, they weren't happy last summer, but it is just a fact that they did not call for a lockdown at Christmas.
No, that's true. Though I suspect Boris Johnson has a point. If they didn't want to come out of it in the summer, then would they have got out of it by Christmas? Who knows? But this is, the argument that he and his whips and his other supporters are making to MPs. Look, this bloke did the vaccines. He got us through the big crisis. He got the big calls right, and that is their argument, and they're going to stick to it. I think a lot of the public has moved past that argument, and a considerable number of Conservative MPs have as well. But it's what Boris Johnson's got. And it's interesting to me that Starmer could only find 2 examples that he wanted to hang his hat on of Boris Johnson misleading the Commons, and one of those we'd sort of already dealt with, which was that he had been told that there were no parties. Now, it's pretty obvious, I think, to a lot of people that Boris Johnson might have worked that out for himself, that they were having parties, particularly the ones that he attended.
But I was assured.
But was he assured by his staff that these were not parties but were work events? That is still their argument now. So in a sense, he does not accept that he misled the Commons. That's the line he's sticking to.
What I was told. It turns out it's more cleverly worded than perhaps we We thought. Now more than 1,000 people watching along on YouTube. JW Andrews says, anyone else muting Johnson's reply? Just listen to Tim and Matt's analysis after. That's very nice. Terry says, may well have watched last week's PMQs. These two clowns again throwing cream cakes at each other. Very good. A broken record, says someone else.
Is that them or us?
I'm not sure. That's a good point.
Though I wasn't here last
You
week,
weren't here
so
last
it must
week.
be
You weren't here
them.
last week. And people pointing out we haven't yet had the European Medicines Agency or vacillate while we vaccinate.
Oh,
So
stand by.
Stand by. Brace yourselves.
Get your bell ready.
Let's go back to the House of Commons. It's Keir Starmer. Question 3.
The guy that said in hindsight he now appreciates it was a party. We've discovered the real Captain Hindsight, haven't we, Mr. Speaker?
We're in a party yet.
Let me spell out. They shout now. They're going to have to go out and defend some of this nonsense. Let me spell out the significance of yesterday's developments. Sue Gray reported the matter to the police, having found evidence of behaviour that's potentially a criminal offence. Prime Minister, if you do not understand the significance of what happened yesterday, then I really do despair. Because the police, Prime Minister, the police having got that material from Sue Gray, subject it to a test to decide whether to investigate. And that test was whether it was the most serious and flagrant type of breach in the rules. The police spelt out that what they meant by that those involved knew or ought to have known what they were doing was an offence, and that there was little ambiguity about the absence of any reasonable defence. Does the Prime Minister...
This question will continue, and I will hear the question. Unfortunately, you might not believe this, but our constituents are very interested in both the questions and the answers. If some members do not wish to hear it, please leave quietly. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, having got the material from Sue Gray, the police had to take a decision as to whether what they had before them was the most serious and flagrant types of breach of the rules. If members want to laugh at that, laugh. The police spelt out what they meant. They decided on the material they've already got that those involved knew or ought to have known what they were doing was an offence, and that there was little ambiguity around the absence of any reasonable defence. Does the Prime Minister really not understand the damage his behaviour is doing to our country?
I mean, it didn't help Lindsay Hoyle jumping in there, Tim Shipman, but that was a bit of a muddle, wasn't it?
It was a bit of a muddle, but there were actually, I thought, in its way, some quite good Starmer material there. And you saw last week that he was deploying humour to effect, and he's turned the Captain Hindsight gag around and saying, you know, this fella's now got hindsight and realised he was at a party. And then back to old style Starmer, the sort of slightly disapproving and a little bit disappointed with the Prime Minister. I'm a very serious lawyer, and very serious things.
I know how
have
the
been
legal
happening.
law works.
I know how the legal, judgy law works, and you appear not to. And he's got a point, you know. I mean, the police did say it was serious or flagrant breaches, and it's odd, this atmosphere on the Conservative benches, where there's a slight air of sort of, oh, we're all a bit bored of this now. All these, oh, what, another party and a cake as well. Oh, goodness me. But, you know, the police are involved. Clearly, some people are going to be found to have breached things. You know, whatever they say about the Prime Minister, it's all fairly unedifying. You know, but Starmer, you know, turning on his kind of best disappointed act, you know, damaging the country and all that sort of thing. But there is a sort of slight air of levity on the Tory benches, and Boris Johnson has been, you know, he's sort of, I wouldn't. To say smirk would be to put rather more sort of moral strength on. But there's some slight sort of nervous giggling and all the rest of it. It's not the grave affair.
It's not a man humbled by the fact the police are now investigating.
That is
what
true.
He's been
No.
doing. Yeah. I confess I've forgotten already what Keir Starmer's question was, but let's go. I suspect it won't make any difference anyway because this is Boris Johnson's answer.
Mr. Speaker, I hope that the right honourable gentleman understands that although the issue that he raises is important, there is simply no way, as he knows, as a lawyer, that I can comment on the investigation that he is currently taking place. But what he also knows, he talks about the most serious issue. He talks about the most serious issue before the public today and before the world today. It's almost as though he was in ignorance of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we have a crisis on the borders of Ukraine, and I can tell him what is going on in the cabinet room of this country is that the UK government, no, Mr. Speaker,
lots of MPs shouting parties
is bringing the West together so that we have, led by this government and this Prime Minister and our Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary, to bring the West together to have the toughest possible package of sanctions to deter President Putin from what I think would be a reckless and a catastrophic invasion. That is what this government is doing. We're getting on with the job, and I think he needs to raise his game, frankly.
Well, there we are. Boris Johnson telling Keir Starmer to raise his game. Let us know who you think is performing better. If you go on to the Times Radio YouTube channel, you can watch along live. We've got a poll asking who is performing better, Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson. Let's go back then. Question number 4, Keir Starmer.
Can I just say honestly,
Or Lindsay Hoyle.
can I just say to both sides, our constituent watching it, tensions are running high, and what we need to be able to do is allow the people out there who are bothered about their futures to hear what is said on both sides. So please, let's give the respect our constituents deserve. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this was the Prime Minister who went into hiding for 5 days because of these allegations. Talk to me about being around for the allegations. Mr. Speaker.
Can I just say, I don't want to do this, but I am determined to make sure our constituents can hear. The next person that stops me hearing will not be continuing in this debate. Questions?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's continual defence is wait for the Sue Gray report. On the 8th of December, he told this House, I will place a copy of the report in the library of the House of Commons. His spokesperson has repeatedly stated that means the full report, not parts of the report, not a summary of the report, not an edited copy. So can the Prime Minister confirm that he will publish the full Sue Gray report as he receives it?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell him is that we've got to leave the report to the independent investigator, as he knows. And of course, when I receive it, of course I will do exactly what I said. But I can tell him that in the meantime, I think what the people of this country want to hear is what we're doing to tackle the issues that matter to all of us, fixing the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, helping people across the country by lifting the living wage, Mr. Speaker, by helping people with their fuel costs, Mr. Speaker, as this government is, and by cutting the tax of people on universal credit, cutting the tax by £1,000. And, Mr. Speaker, that party opposite are committed to abolishing universal credit. That's their policy.
Keir Starmer.
Let's just jump in there, Tim Shipman. Given the cost of living crisis and the fact there's a big cabinet row about putting up national insurance, it's quite interesting. There does seem to be quite an interesting argument. Say, let's stop talking about parties. Let's talk about how we're making everyone worse off instead.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Johnson has gone there before Starmer. He went there first on Ukraine. He went there first on cost of living. I mean, that doesn't mean he won't repeat the same answers if he is asked about it. But though, you know, we've had 4 questions on this now, and Labour do want it on the record that the report's going to be published in full. They sort of got that. Not stated explicitly, but they got Johnson to agree that, you know, he would stick by what he'd said. So, you know, he's got 2 questions left. Let's see if he can perform the pivot we think he should perform.
There we are. Like you said, you could still be watching a lot. We've got 2 on the who is performing better. 76% say Keir Starmer, 24% say Boris Johnson. And Damien says, first time I've ever watched Times Radio. Great show, Matt. I have to say I'm disappointed with how glossy and polished the studio is. I was hoping for a Harry Potter-style broom cupboard. Yeah. There we are. Right, we go back. Question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Cutting the tax. The police say the evidence meets the test. Frankly, the public have made up their minds. They know he's not fit for the job, and that's what really matters here. Throughout this scandal, the Tories have done immense damage to public trust. When the leader of the Scottish Conservatives said the Prime Minister should resign, the leader of the House called him a lightweight. English Conservatives publicly undermining the Union by treating Scotland with utter disdain. How much damage are the Prime Minister and his Cabinet prepared to do to save his skin?
Minister.
Really a question.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that he was offering a yet more general criticism of what's been going on in Downing Street. Let me just remind the House of what's been going on in Downing Street. We've been prioritising the COVID backlogs, Mr. Speaker, investing massively in 9 million more scans so that people get the treatment that they need and that they've been waiting for, and making sure that we have 44,000 more people in our... Yes, it says it's rubbish. They didn't vote for it, Mr. Speaker. They don't support it. 44,000 more people in our NHS now than there were in 2020, Mr. And we're fixing social care, Mr. Speaker, which governments have neglected for decades, and Labour did absolutely nothing. They have no plan at all to fix the NHS or to fix social care. Vote Labour, wait longer.
We have a new slogan.
Vote Labour, wait longer. It does seem like they've just gone, can you just come up with a list of all the things that we've done which are good?
Very much. And actually, he's not repeating himself. He's kind of
he's working
carved
his
it
way
up
through
and he's working his way through.
That's why he wanted to get his 500,000 people out of work back into work announcement out in the first one. Because each time, I think, we've had a different...
2 or 3 different sort of
different
things
change of tack, whether it's, cost of living crisis, getting people back into work. He'd have kept us in lockdown, fastest growing economy, and now 9 million more scans.
Yeah. But Starmer sort of let him do that with a pretty weak question.
It sort of petered out again.
He's not fit for the job. What are you going to do about that? Or words to that effect. It's you're supposed to build to a crescendo, and it feels like the real action was earlier.
Well, let's see if Keir Starmer can pick it up one last time. PMQs Unpacked. Question number 6.
Keir Starmer.
The reality is that we now have the shameful spectacle of a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom being subject to a police investigation. Unable to lead the country, incapable of doing the right thing, and every day his Cabinet fail to speak out, they become more and more complicit. And what's utterly damning, despite the huff and puff, is that this is all happening when petrol prices, the weekly shop and energy bills are going through the roof. 3 months ago, Labour suggested cutting VAT from energy bills. Still, the government has failed to act. Instead of getting on with their jobs, they're wheeled out to save his. Whatever he says in his statement later today or tomorrow won't change the facts. Isn't this a Prime Minister and a government that have shown nothing but contempt for the decency, honesty and respect that define this country?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, we love this country and we're doing everything in our power to help this country. And of course he wants me out of the way, Mr. Speaker. Of course he wants me out of the way. He does. And I can't, and many people, of course, I don't deny it. For all sorts of reasons, many people may want me out of the way, but I tell you the reason he wants me out of the way is because he knows that this government can be trusted to deliver. And we did. And we delivered on Brexit, Mr. Speaker. He voted 48 times. He voted 48 times to take this country back into the European Union. We delivered. He did. He can't be trusted. We delivered the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, Mr. Speaker, and we will deliver on our plan to unite and level up across the whole of the UK. Crime down 10%, Mr. Speaker. Job vacancies at a record high. Colossal investment in... Yes, Mr. Speaker, we're delivering and they have no plan. 3 times as much tech investment as France in this country, twice as much as Germany. We have a vision for this country as the most... as the most prosperous and successful economy in Europe because we are going to unite and level up. The problem with the Labour Party today, Mr. Speaker, is that he's a lawyer, not a leader. That's the truth. That's the truth, Mr. Speaker. We've taken the tough decisions.
I can't hear what the Prime Minister's got to say. No. I would have thought he's the Prime Minister of this side of the House. I'm surprised that this side of the House is going to listen to it, because I do. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I only wanted to add the point that we've taken the tough decisions. We've got the big calls right, and in particular, I am getting on with the job.
Well, there we are. A lawyer, not a leader.
Yep. And Starmer didn't ask a question. He gave a summing up for the prosecution.
Yeah, for the news.
Yeah. And Boris Johnson gave a summing up for the defence. Now, in a sense, the substance of it doesn't matter that much, but the cacophonous noise on the Tory benches makes me feel like he is actually getting somewhere in terms of rallying his troops.
It cuts both ways, though, doesn't it? Because part of them must be thinking, well, if it wasn't for this blooming party business, we'd be able to be talking about all that, and it's not getting any traction.
That's very true, and there are some people who feel very strongly about that. You were hearing from David Davis earlier, but I think the mood is turning a little into, is this a lot of fuss?
Can we just squeeze through it?
Can we squeeze through it?
I thought it was interesting.
Can we fight on and get back to saying
Boris Johnson talking about lots of people want me out of the way. I wondered whether that was as much about the people sitting behind him as the people sitting on
Rishi Sunak didn't put his hand up at that point. But, the sad truth, though, is that we've all sat through, half an hour of fun here. And none of that really will matter when Sue Gray publishes her report.
And it does feel a little bit like
and that will swamp the news, and, both of them will be forced to respond, and what will really be all over the evening news if it comes this afternoon is that. But what you do have, is an exchange that allows you to gauge levels of support, and I think...
And actually probably a dress rehearsal for that, that statement.
Starmer did reasonably well. He had a decent amount to play with. He made a few good jokes. He made a few good attacks. He summed up his own case effectively. But I think some Tories will look at that and think Boris Johnson is not going anywhere and he's going to keep fighting. And if that's the case, we might as well get behind him.
It's interesting. The definite shift in the comments online of some people saying that Boris Johnson wiped the floor with him, Starmer's not landing any punches. And somebody helpfully pointed out that apparently vote Labour wait longer. Boris Johnson used that back in September, so it's not new. But maybe we've been talking about parties ever since then, to talk about not a single cake joke, which I thought was
That's absolutely astonishing.
Somebody in Keir Starmer's office should resign for that if they couldn't come up with a single cake joke. Right, that brings us to the end of PMQs Unpacked. We'll bring you the best of the rest after the news. Tim Shipman, chief political commentator for the Sunday Times, is here with me. Watch along on the Times Radio YouTube channel. We'll be back with the best of the rest of the questions after we get a news update from Rachel Jewell.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. Boris Johnson has repeated his insistence he cannot answer questions over Partygate allegations, suggesting Sir Keir Starmer, as a lawyer, should know this. The Prime Minister has been facing MPs as